very light denim jacket, not a big bulky one, held him down, and then they executed him. In terms of the media spin, they tried to avoid some sort of inquiry for many, many months. The police have had no sort of penalty against them. They've managed to avoid any sort of real reform. And in fact, I think the officers who did the execution haven't even been sacked. When the coroner listened to the evidence, when he was summing up at the end of the inquest, he said something like, you know, these poor police officers are traumatized by what they went through. Poor guys. So, I don't know, it's the whole thing stank, basically. And it's interesting, I think what was interesting watching it was the way that the media just fell hook, line and sinker for the official account, and they've always sided with the police in this, and, you know, there was this sort of drive to cover up whatever the police might have been involved in, again, by the authorities. So it's the same old, really, and it's a tragedy for the young man, obviously.
Quite rightly so, you said that your focus is on looking at the underlying potential lies around 9/11. Mm-hmm. But, so you don't want to point the finger at anybody, you don't want to say, you don't want to make any comment on who might have been behind it. But the fact is that since 2001, Arabs have been bombed and have been treated as the de facto culprits in this case. And 1 million people, to say the least, have died in Iraq, and God knows how many more million are going to die in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So we already have a tried and convicted population worldwide that's has been treated as the culprit.
Yeah.
Just look at the Sri Lankan, all like the protests that have been going on in Toronto. Talk to anybody about that subject who doesn't know anything about their culture. It's genocide what's going on over there. But
let me just finish my point. What I'd like to put forward is, I think in the media, the mainstream media, they said, well, it's a little bit, to think of the American government being behind the bombing of the Twin Towers is a little bit. Why would they? Why would they perpetrate Pearl Harbor on their own, in the apple, the world? Mm-hmm. So to me, that only leaves one definite possibility, and that is Mossad, Israeli military intelligence. And I know that it's like, it may sound like, I'm pointing a finger or whatever, that without any basis. But I'm sure we could go into a lot of the details, and then maybe some facts could erupt. But why isn't Mossad ever mentioned? Or there's very extremely little mention of Mossad in the whole 9/11.
Well, again, we need to establish we need to establish we need to establish some sort of evidential chain, which is why we need an inquiry. I can't speak for the whole 9/11 movement, so I agree that a whole population, a whole segment of the world has been criminalized by these acts, which is why we do need this new inquiry. And I also like to draw attention to the fact that Professor David Ray Griffin, the author of The New Pearl Harbor, and another very good researcher based in Europe called Elias Davidson, who's of Jewish extraction, actually, and moved, he's what they call a self-hating Jew because he doesn't like what the Israeli state is doing in that part of the world. But anyway, they've both done a lot of research into were the 19 alleged hijackers even on the planes that day. And actually, there is no evidence that would stand up forensically in a court of law to prove that they were. I mean, there are pictures of them, CCTV pictures with no date time stamp of them allegedly getting on a feeder flight, but nothing more than that. And when I say forensic evidence, I mean stuff that could stand up if they were ever put on trial. There is nothing. That's what these two people have established. And yet, as you say, because of this myth that's gone around, whole peoples are being targeted. But we therefore need a new independent inquiry. We can't afford to point the finger at any one group because it's not for us to speculate about what did happen that day. All we can do is pull out certain evidential bits and present them to people and say, look, this is why we need a new inquiry.
People like, we're being picked off the streets and without
any
evidence, whatever. So why can't
if you wish to, but I'm saying I'm not going to.
There are some elements there were some newspaper articles back in 2001 that talk about a bunch of Israelis who were arrested. Actually, about 50 Israelis were arrested and shipped back to Israel without without any real due process.
Mhm.
So I mean, there are things that have come out that they have been glossed over, buried, and in any kind of a crime, you have a suspect. The suspect may not be guilty, but you bring the suspect out. You have your evidence. You throw the charges at them, and maybe they stand the case or not. But there's like touching Israel or touching Mossad is like it's like totally.
But we have to.
Out of the equation.
Yeah, we have to establish some sort of evidence, which is why we need the new inquiry. I mean, if this is a false flag attack, we need to get the evidence together for a case, and it could point towards rogue elements in the American administration, could point to other groups. We don't know at this point. That's why we need to put a case together, I think. But I understand your pain. I understand where you're coming from. I know. I feel sick to the heart about what has been done because of this attack. There is, if you're interested, there's another campaign, another approach to dealing with what's going on in the Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan. There's a campaign which has started in Europe called Make Wars History, which you can Google. And this looks at the international laws of war. And many people want to put Bush on the dock for genocide and all the rest of it, as many of us were down demonstrating yesterday. But it's very informative, because if you look at the international laws of war, which started in 1928 with the Treaty for the Renunciation of War, which has been nicknamed the Kellogg-Briand Pact, this was actually signed by most countries in the world, and this was the law that was used to prosecute and hang the Nazi war criminals after the Second World War at the Nuremberg trials. So we have that, and that law is still in place, and it makes any war illegal, apart from in the case of extreme self-defense, when you're on the brink as a country of being invaded by another country. That's the only justification for any sort of military action. Anything else is therefore aggressive, anything else is de facto illegal. Then you have the Nuremberg Principles, then you have the Geneva Conventions, then you have the Rome Treaty, which of course most of our countries are signed up to, but not the US. And under all those laws, it's basically saying we cannot commit an aggressive act because that's illegal. And also, it means that any citizen within a country, if they pay their taxes to support these illegal acts, it's not just the MPs who voted for it that are culpable. We are culpable as accessories to those crimes. So the campaign, I'll be with you in a minute, sir. The campaign in Europe is looking at this and saying, look, let's get a campaign going where we report MPs who voted for these wars to the police, and they have started to do that in the UK, and they started an investigation into Jack Straw and Tony Blair. And also to withhold tax that goes to these illegal wars. Not to not pay tax, but to put it in an escrow account with the court and say, we've put the tax aside, but you're not having it if you're going to spend it on war, which is illegal. So, I urge all of you to have a look at that. It's quite an interesting concept, which broadens out the sort of peace movement. So, that is another way of perhaps potentially stopping these illegal wars in the Middle East. But, I mean, the best way to do it, of course, would be get these people in a dock somewhere for these crimes. That would deter others. Anyway.
Yeah, sorry, I hope you don't think it's too nasty. When you joined the MI5, they put a paper before you whereabout you promised not to tell whistleblower. So you didn't like what they were doing, you come out, and you whistleblower.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I ask you is this. Do you feel you've broken the law?
Technically, yes.
Well, I mean, you have.
Technically, I have broken the law.
You've broken the law. So,
Yes, because I actually said, I talked about being in MI5 and saying, there was this mismanagement, there was this incompetence.
Right, so technically you broke the law,
Mm-hmm.
you say. And they are technically prosecuting you.
They're not. No, I mean, this is an issue of law which basically says there is an Official Secrets Act to protect real secrets. What we blew the whistle on, I would argue, is unofficial secrets because they are crimes in themselves. There is a whole raft of stuff that I witnessed and that I was involved in that did follow the law, that did follow the procedures, that did get good results. And I would never breathe a word of that. And I would certainly never breathe a word about sensitive operational techniques or agent identities or harm anyone else like that. However, if you see crimes being committed, I think there's a moral duty to try and do something about it, especially when it results in the deaths of innocent people. So if I were put in that situation again, I would probably do the same thing again. I might do it slightly differently. I mean, God, there's